Downstairs carpet is different. We did everything we could to clean the carpet. However, on Thursday night, we noticed that it was starting not to smell so good. And by Friday morning, when I came in for school at about 8 o'clock, it was really not good. So I peeled up one of the tiles, and what I didn't realize was on the back side of that tile, that floor tile, was, wow, that thing just fell off. And what are you doing back there? You're throwing stuff? Our building's falling apart. And so anyhow, on the back side of that floor tile was a padded cushion, and that acted like a sponge with all that water, and it was wet, and we just couldn't. There's no way you're going to get that dry, and so we made the decision with the smell and the moisture still there, decided to pull that carpet out. And I want to say thank you to Joel, Mark, and Ron in particular. Went to town on that, and very thankful for Joel. He lined it up. He had this surplus commercial grade carpet that we just were able to throw down real quick. So that is not permanent, all right? That is not installed properly, so over time it'll have some problems. So it's just a temporary fix till we get the floor tile, carpet tile that we want. But I want to say thank you to everybody. And it smelled immediately better down there. And it's good. So it's much better than it was on Thursday night, and particularly Friday when I opened the door. I was like, whoa. I'm like, we cannot leave it like this. So we got to get this taken care of. So anyhow, praise the Lord for that. We are in Nehemiah chapter number 5. So we've been going through our leadership study out of Nehemiah, verse by verse, through this chapter. And we now come to chapter number 5. And, early, there's been a lot of studies on leadership. Early theories of group leadership claimed that a person could function as a leader so long as he had the personality that made it possible for all the members of the group to obtain the objectives under his supervision. So as long as I had the personality to help you achieve your goal, I was a good leader, all right? The early ideas of leadership believed that leadership consisted in actions that were functionally related to goal achievement, all right? So in other words, are you achieving the goal? All right? Are you getting it done? If you're getting it done, you're a good leader. However, the theory did not provide for what you could call role differentiating within the group, particularly when certain members initiate more of the share of communication. In other words, what happens when somebody else is trying to take charge? See, just having a good personality is not going to deal with that. What happens when problems arise with your plan? Having a good personality is not necessarily going to fix that. What happens when the people you're working with are going through some personal things and how they're operating changes? Having a good personality may not necessarily deal with that. So this is why effective leadership idea changes to the need of being what we would call a task. We talked about this before. There's two streams of effective leadership. All right, there's a task specialist. You have to be a good leader, you've got to be semi-organized and be able to put together and accomplish a plan. Then you have to be what we would call a social emotional expert. You need to be able to relate with people. You can have a great plan, but if you can't relate with people, it's not going to work. All right? You can relate with people, but if you don't have a good plan, it won't work. So these people are one who can maintain group morale and harmony, at the same time help ease tensions that arise from certain working conditions. Have you ever noticed if you put a bunch of people together to work on something that tension can rise? Problems exist. And what does a leader often have to do? He has to get people to get along. I can tell you as a pastor, I spend far more time helping people to get along with other people than people having a problem with me or my decisions or my leadership. That happens sometimes, but I would say that's the minority. I spend a lot more time making sure that this person isn't mad at this person or this person handles this situation properly, because if they do what they're about to do, then this person over here is going to get really offended. And then I got a problem. I spend a lot more time. And by the way, you try to get, I'm not great, but decent at getting out in front of it. Whoa, don't do that. Don't do that, because if you do that, here's what's going to happen. All right? And then we'll have a bigger mess. So let's deal with this appropriately, and so on. So now, with that said, there is a tension within society that really manifests itself almost anywhere, and that is the tension between the rich and the poor. And there is a tension there. All right. Think about this. Was there problems in the early church between the rich and the poor in the church? There were. There were. James had to talk about it. All right? And, that problem exists in the church today. You said, well, does Lifeline have it? It's nobody's fault but yes. You said, what are you talking about? I'll prove it to you right now, because I'll tell you, I've been told this more than once. So Haverhill's a big area. It's 40 square miles, which in Massachusetts is massive, all right? Haverhill's a big area. And because it's a big area, it has different sections of the city. You go downtown, it's very urbanized. You go over to the Acre, it's a rough part of town, okay? There's some inner city elements in Haverhill. And then look around. We don't look like that at all. This looks rural, all right? You can go down that way a couple miles down East Broadway and look at the mansions right on the river. All right, there's a great diversification, all right, within Haverhill. And we, over the years, have had people from the downtown area come. And then they tell me they're not coming back. I said, why? They said, I don't fit here. I don't fit here. You're too rich for me. I'm like, what? It's not that anybody was rude. It's not that anybody wasn't kind. It's that they look around and they say, this is not a poor church. And I wish we were as rich as they think we are. But I get it. It's perception. It's been said to me multiple times. They don't feel comfortable because they think they're of a lower income bracket than who they look at, which may or may not be true. It's just perception, all right? And what can you do about that? I don't think you can do anything about it. Now, if our church were downtown and we were doing the same thing, they probably wouldn't have a problem because they know, well, you're right here, but we're on the outskirts of town. And I think, honestly, people they don't want to get up that early and come on the bus or van and all that. But look, it exists. It happens, all right? And so they feel like they can't fit or connect, and it's nothing we've done. It's just the way it is. And that's why I've said we could start another church, and of course it would need a lot of funding. But you could start another church downtown, and it would be an utterly different ministry, because it would reach a completely different group of people more effectively than we have thus far. And but not only does this, it's not just true in churches, businesses can deal with conflict with employees based on salary. You said, what are you talking about? One guy makes more than the other. Does that ever cause problems? Or, when you find out what somebody makes or somebody gets a promotion over somebody, look, you can immediately have conflict at work over income and who gets promoted and so on. So how does administration, how does leaders handle situations like this? So as we look at Nehemiah 5, we see the man who succeeds in handling circumstances of this nature. We're going to see that the person who succeeds at this is the one who does this. He sees people as people. The truth of the matter is, I could care less about what people make. I really don't care. Doesn't matter to me one bit. I don't, no bearing. And why? Because we want to see people as people, and people have value. See, I don't care what your past is, you have value. I don't care what your job is, you have value. I don't care how old you are, you have value. All right? And why? Because the Lord has said so. And people are not to be regarded as things or to be used and exploited. Right? There have been ministries that just use people like cogs in a wheel and wear them out till they're no longer viable, and they just replace them and they burn them out. And I'm all about people being involved in ministry. I think everybody ought to have a place of service, but I also believe that we have to be realistic in looking at what's going on in your life and what is it that you're doing. And is that conducive to your family? Is that conducive to your children? Are you spending enough time with your family? Or are you missing out on key family time because of ministry things? And let's see if we can fix that somehow. Because I don't want to burn people out, because you're not cogs in a wheel. You're valuable, you're important, all right? And there's a balance. You ought to do something for the Lord. If all you do is just show up and sit there and stare at me, that's not God's plan. All right? Now, look, if you have a vibrant prayer ministry at home and you're praying for me on a daily basis and that's your ministry, glory to God. We need more of that, all right? So I'm not saying just because you don't have an official, I teach a Sunday school class, or, I clean the building, or I take care of the lawn, or I work in the sound room, or I sing the choir. But you say, I don't have any of that. But if you pray for me every day, I'll take it. All right? I'll take it. So if you can say, hey, Pastor, I pray for you every day. Glory to God, that's a ministry. Don't let up. Keep on it, all right? It might be the most important ministry that we have. And anyhow, we all ought to do something. And so not only does the person, Nehemiah, he treats people as people, but he's not afraid to point out the truth, even though the truth might be painful. One of the things that I hope that people appreciate about me is I will tell you the truth, even if the truth is painful. I am not interested in telling people what they want to hear. I want to tell them the truth. However, I will try to do that as nice as possible, all right? I actually do try to be kind, to speak the truth in love, all right? Well, I'm just going to, I got no problem telling the truth. Yeah, but you're not supposed to rip their head off when you do it, all right? And, some people are proud of the fact that, I'll tell everybody, I'll let them know exactly what I think. Yeah, we know that, but you're supposed to do it in love, all right? It's, be kind. Like, we can tell the truth and not be kind about it. And so, tell the truth, even though it's painful, but the person also not only speaking the truth, but must be able to assume responsibility and facilitate workers working together despite differences. This is a great challenge in your job. At church, all right, it can be challenging, but it's a little bit easier because let's say this. At church, we have the commonality of Jesus Christ. All right? Now, we're going to have different personality types. We're going to have different backgrounds, different level of education, intellectual ability. There's all different types in a church. And so there is a challenge of getting people to work together, okay? There is definitely a challenge. But how about at your job? Oh, wow, you got people from all over the place, all different backgrounds, all different ideas. And that's even more challenging, never mind the personalities and so on. So it can be very challenging. And so this kind of leadership lies in commitment to the truth. Without a commitment to truth, extremism is going to result. So you got to be committed to the truth. So let's get into this now. And let's look at the first 5 verses of Nehemiah 5 to start off, all right? Nehemiah 5, verse 1 says, "And there was a great cry of the people and of their wives against their brethren, the Jews. For there were that said, we, our sons and our daughters are many. Therefore we take up corn for them, that we may eat and live. Some also that were, some also there were that said, we have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses that we may buy corn because of the dearth. There were also that said, we have borrowed money for the king's tribute, and that upon our lands and vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children, and lo, we bring in bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants, and some of our daughters are brought unto bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. All right, we got a lot to explain here. There are some, what's happening here, because I know it's like, wait, what is that? What does that mean? What does it mean? I don't understand. There are principles of the Levitical law we need to look at. There were practices of society that the Bible in the Old Testament gave rules to that are not being followed. Okay, so basically, and we're going to go through this and I'm going to explain it, all right? But what I want you to remember is this. You got a bunch of Jewish people not obeying the Bible, all right? That's what's going on here. So God's people are not doing something God's way. That's what I want you to know. It's causing problems. When you don't do things God's way, it causes problems. There's a right way and a wrong way. There's God's way and then there's the world's way. You do things the world. When God's people do things the world's way, it causes problems. So what happens here is there's a complaint from the work. They're rebuilding the wall. All right, remember, now Nehemiah's already dealt with two rounds of people wanting to quit. First, because they were attacking them personally. Secondly, because they were threatening physical attack, and he has navigated that, and he's got them still working. But now he's got a new problem. There's a complaint from the working class. Particularly, the wives are upset. All right, he's got a bunch of upset wives. All right, and so that Nehemiah has these moms, particularly the moms, are not happy. And they're not happy because they're impoverished. But why are they poor? Why are they poor? They shouldn't be, but they are. Let me give you, we got to do a little history here. I'm going to need some readers. Let's, do this. Keep mark here. Let's turn back to Ezra. It's just to the left, the previous book, and look at Ezra 1, all right? We'll read in a second. So 90 years prior, we're going to do a little bit of history here. You got go back 90 years to the writing of Nehemiah. And the people returned from Babylon, from exile, back to Jerusalem. And they came with a lot of goods. Ezra 1, let's pick up in verse 5. All right, it says, and we'll read down through verse 11. It says, then rose up chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, with all them whose spirit God had raised, to go up to build the house of the Lord which is in Jerusalem. And all they that were about them strengthened their hands with vessels of silver, with gold, with goods, and with beasts, and with precious things, besides all that was willingly offered. Also Cyrus the king brought forth vessels of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem, and put them in the house of his gods. Even those did Cyrus king of Persia bring forth by the hand of Mithridath the treasure, and numbered them in Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. And this is the number of them: 30 chargers of gold, 1,000 chargers of silver, and 29 knives, 30 basins of gold, silver basins of second sort, 410 of others. The other vessels, 1,000, and all the vessels of gold and silver were 5,400. All these did Sheshbazzar bring up with them of captivity, that were brought up from Babylon unto Jerusalem. Okay, so they got a lot of silver and gold they're bringing with them. Those that then we see that those that remained behind in Babylon. Now, not all the Jews went back. Just a portion of them went back. But what we find out when we study this out is that the people that were leaving, the people who stayed behind, gave generously to them financially. So they're bringing a bunch of stuff from the King Cyrus that he gave back to them. And the people are giving to them individually. And even the king, further, they left the land with many animals. And, of course, back in that day, animals were as good as money, all right? Turn over to Ezra chapter 2, all right? Ezra chapter 2, and look with me at verse 66, all right? And while we're turning there, I do need some other readers. Who'd like to read for me so that we can move this along? All right, Roger, if you can find Haggai, I'm going to have you read chapter 1, verse 4. And then can I get another reader? All right, Joel, I'm going to have you read Nehemiah 7, verses 71 and 72. And then give me one more. Abiel, can you do Ezra 7, verses 15 and 16? All right, that'll be good for a little bit. We'll get there in a moment. So, let's read Ezra together, I'll read Ezra 2, verses 66 and 67. It says, their horses were 736, their mules 245, their camels 435, their asses 6,720. All right, so they brought a bunch of animals with them too, and that's as good as money. Additional evidence of their wealth is found in the fact that the Jews were paneling their new homes, which is something that was reserved for kings. Haggai 1:4, go ahead.
Is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house lie waste?
Okay, so basically there was an issue where they were supposed to go back and rebuild the temple, and they kind of did, but it was in shambles. But they were building really nice homes. Sealed houses, you know what that is? It's crown molding, right? So the Jews are all putting up crown molding in their homes, yet the temple was a disaster, all right? Now, look, you don't put up crown molding unless you just got money to burn, all right? You know, it's just I mean, you know, it's just, we put a crown molding, all right? It's basically what they're making their houses real fancy. In that day, only kings did that, all right? Only kings did that. And they were doing stuff that kings did, but the houses. So the point is this, you don't do that unless you got money. Back then, you didn't do that unless you had money, and they had a lot of it. And so while they built the temple, but when they finally did get to the temple, they built it very extravagant. Nehemiah 7, verses 71 and 72. Go ahead.
And some of the chief of the fathers gave to the treasure of the work 20,000 drams of gold and 2,200 pounds of silver. And that which the rest of the people gave was 20,000 drams of gold and 2,000 pounds of silver and 77 priests' garments.
Okay, so the people in Jerusalem are giving a lot. Where did it come from? They had money. They're giving thousands of pounds of gold and stuff because they have it. Just 13 years prior to Nehemiah, the second group comes back. So that's like 70 plus years later, another group from Babylon comes. Artaxerxes I and his counselors gave freely when that second group came. Read Ezra 7, verses 15 and 16.
And to carry the silver and gold which the king and his counselors have freely offered unto the God of Israel, whose habitation is in Jerusalem, and all the silver and gold that thou canst find in all the province of Babylon, with the freewill offering of the people and of the priests, offering willingly for the house of their God, which is in Jerusalem.
All right, can I have one more reader? Who'd like to read for me? Steve, you're going to go to Zechariah, and you're going to read chapter 6, verse 10 and 11. So we have Artaxerxes giving gifts to the second group, and then we see even more evidence of when those people come that the remaining Jews also give to them a lot of their personal wealth. Zechariah 6, verse 10 and 11. Steve, if you're there, go ahead and read that.
Take of them of the captivity, even of Heldai, of Tobijah, and of Jediah, which are come from Babylon, and come thou the same day, and go into the house of Josiah the son of Zephaniah. Then take silver and gold, make crowns, and set them on the head of Joshua the son of Josedek, the high priest.
Okay, so there's a lot of money. So how are they now poor? And what we got to do is take a closer look at the internal affairs of the Jews. And we're going to see three distinct groups mentioned in these verses. Let's go back to Nehemiah 5, all right? I want you to see Nehemiah 5. Let's go there. And I want you to see these three distinct groups that are being talked about. Now, the first group to voice their grievance are what we would call merchants and laborers. All right, look at verse 2. For there were that said, we, our sons and our daughters, are many. Therefore, we take up corn for them that we may eat and live. Okay, so we see here by their own admission, this group right here, there's a lot of them. We are many. It means they got large families. And while they're rebuilding the wall, you know what they need to do? They need to take care of they got a lot of kids. And here's the thing. While they're working on the wall, you know what they're not doing? Working. Imagine you're at your house and we have a big project here at church, and I say, all right, guys, I need you to take a leave of absence from your job to come here and work. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not paying you. Because that's what happened. And they did it. But now they're running out of money to take care of their family. And they're no longer able to support those who are dependent on them because their resources have been used up. And the situation they're facing is bleak. And there's really no way out of this unless help comes. The second group are farmers. Look at verse 3. Some also were there that said, we have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses that we may buy corn because of the dearth. Now, these guys, their lands, vineyards, houses, all right, they're all intertwined. They were not in the city because you're not going to have lands in the city. You're not going to have vineyards in the city. It would have been on the outskirts of the city. These are the people that would go out and come in, all right? They lived out in the rural areas. And one of the problems is that these farms were especially vulnerable to robbers. Other tribal groups could cross the border. It was not uncommon for these people to anticipate what would be called a bumper crop extra, only to have it stolen by those that raided their lands or plundered their small villages. And in these times, these tight times, a farmer to support his family would have to borrow money on his field against his crop. So in other words, all right, let's say Gene here's the banker, and I'm short on money. Well, it's the same thing with any bank. Hey, I want to borrow money. Well, how are you going to pay me back? Doesn't a bank want to know how you're going to pay them back? Don't they ask some questions about your ability to pay them back? They do. You say, well, how are you going to pay me? How are you going to pay me back? I said, well, I have this land, and we have this crop, and we know when it comes in, I'll be able to sell it, and then I can pay you. And they say, okay. So they would borrow money against their own land, against the future crop that hadn't come in. Here was the problem. What the Jews were doing to their own brethren was charging a 12% interest rate. A 12% interest rate, which is not good. All right? Now, if you think, interest rates aren't good right now, that's worse. All right? And they were charging a 12% interest rate, which at that day was considered exorbitant. Now, what we know in this time frame from Haggai is, and Nehemiah alludes to it, notice verse 3, the last word, dearth. What's that? It means the crop didn't come in. And we know Haggai talked about it well. At this time, a dearth happened. These people borrowed money against their crop that didn't come in. Everybody knew the crop didn't come in, but what happens now? I can't pay that bill. And famine or locusts, we don't know which, decimated the land. Then people who made these loans would take away their lands and sell, this is a little different now, sell their family into slavery to pay the debt. All right, so I didn't pay the loan. So now Gene takes my wife and kids and sells them into slavery. That was an acceptable, in the culture, practice of that day. All right? Thank the Lord, not today. All right? Because I know a few people who might be taking some loans out. I would not. I'm very happy, but maybe some of my family might take a loan out against me. But yeah. Well, that's a great question. Okay? I'm going to get to the answer of that, all right? Because the Word of God put limits on this. It was a culturally acceptable practice. The Word of God restricted it, and what we're going to see is they were ignoring it. So there were specific time frames that the Word of God limited this practice, and the Jews were not adhering to it. Come back to verse 5. Nehemiah 5:5. Now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children. And lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants, and some of our daughters are brought unto bondage already. Meaning, I borrowed against my land, the crop didn't come in, and I'm here working, and while I'm working on the wall, the fellow Jew in town that runs the bank just sold my family into slavery. Some of the moms were upset because their daughters, their sons, had been sold into servitude. When I say slavery, it's not what we think in American history, slavery. It's more like contract work, but you're paying off of a debt. It wasn't as bad, but it still was not good. In other words, they took them and said, you got to work here and you can't leave. And so basically what they're saying is, yeah, our children are now like their children. They have them. They took them, and now they're working to pay off the debt while we work on the wall. And moms were not happy. Notice he goes on to say in verse 5, neither is it in our power to redeem them. We do not have the money to get them back. For other men have our lands and vineyards. They took our lands. This is what the Jews were doing to each other. This wasn't enemies. This wasn't foreigners. This was what they were doing to each other. And it was contrary to the law of God. Let's turn over to Deuteronomy, all right? Keep your finger here. Let's go to Deuteronomy 23, all right? Deuteronomy 23. And let's pick up in verse number, 19, all right? 19, and I'll read down 19 and 20, all right? It says, thou shalt not lend upon usury to thy brother, usury of money, usury of victuals, usury of anything that is lent upon usury. Unto a stranger thou may lend upon usury, but unto thy brother thou shalt not lend upon usury, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all that thou settest thy hand to in the land whither thou goest. Turn to the next chapter, chapter 24, and I want you to look at verse number 10. 24, verse 10. When thou dost lend thy brother anything, thou shalt not go into his house to fetch his pledge. Thou shalt stand abroad, and the man to whom thou dost lend shall bring out the pledge abroad to thee. And if the man be poor, thou shalt not sleep with his pledge. And do I want to keep reading? Verse 13. In any case, thou shalt deliver him the pledge again when the sun goeth down, that he may sleep in his own raiment, and bless thee, and it shall be righteousness unto thee before the Lord thy God. All right, so you're not supposed to go into your brother's house and take anything. They had. You weren't supposed to do usury, which that's co-signing, but it's also like it has the idea of like this interest rate. Okay, you're not supposed to do that, and they were doing it. And the slaves were supposed to be freed every 7th year. All right, that's the answer to your question. Your contract, so, and this is the way it worked. Every 7 years, contracts ended. So the longest contract you could have of servitude was 7 years. But let's say 3 years have gone by. Well, now your contract's only 4 years. Every 7 years, it reset. And every 50 years was called the year of Jubilee. In the year of Jubilee, everybody's lands went back to who they owned. So if I needed to, I sell my land to Banker Gene, all right? Every 50 years, that land comes back to my family. Now, the sale price is predicated on where are we in conjunction to the year of Jubilee. So if I'm giving her my land for 50 years, that's a big sum. Well, if the year of Jubilee is 2 years from now, that's a smaller sum. But what you know is that the land will stay within the family. It'll always come back to the same family. Every 7 years, it resets. Okay, man, I'm in debt. I could put myself in what we would call slavery or servitude. I could have a contract. Don, I'm going to work for you. Well, let's see. Every 7 years, we're 2 years in, so 5 years I'm going to commit to you. And we come to an agreement, okay? And I could take my family with me and technically bring my whole family in with me, and you're paying all of us. We're working on your farm. We're making money. And at the end of 5 years, we're out by Levitical law. They weren't doing that. They were doing what the world does. I'll read a few verses to you for time's sake. Leviticus 25:10. And ye shall hallow the 50th year, that's the year of Jubilee, and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants. It shall be Jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possessions, and ye shall return every man unto his family. Deuteronomy 15:1 says, and at the end of 7 years thou shalt make a release. Further, in time of drought or famine, a man's lands could not be mortgaged or sold to someone could only be mortgaged or sold to someone of the same tribe, the 12 tribes of Israel, all right? So in times of famine or drought, you couldn't sell your land to anybody. It had to be somebody of the same tribe. Leviticus 25:25. If thy brother be waxen poor, and hath sold away some of his possession, and if any of his kin come to redeem it, then he shall redeem it, that which his brother has sold. And if a man have none to redeem it, and himself be able to redeem it, then let him count the years of the sale thereof. So you understand, count the years. How many years are we paying for here? And restore the overplus unto the man to whom he sold it, that he may return unto his possession. So it always reverted back. And guys, we can go in more detail on this. There's ample scripture there was all these nuances of land and selling and buying and servitude, okay, and contract. Very detailed stuff in the Bible, and none of it was happening in Jerusalem at this time. God planned for his people to be free. Here's the thing. There's always going to be poor people. But in the economy structured that God set up, poor people would never become destitute. They might not have a lot, but they'd be able to get by. And even if they were compelled to mortgage their lands and were forced to sell themselves into slavery, it would only be for a limited time. And to make provision for the poor, the Lord established that the rich were to lend to the poor. Now let's go turn to Deuteronomy 15. Let's all turn there. Deuteronomy 15, and let's pick up in verse number 7. And I'm hoping I can get through this point here. Yeah, we should be able to make it. All right, Deuteronomy 15, look with me at verse 7. It says that there be any among you a poor man, and one of his brethren within any of the gates in thy land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not harden thy heart, nor shut thy hand from thy poor brother, but thou shalt open thy hand wide to him, and shalt surely lend him sufficient for his need in that which he wanteth. Beware that there not be a thought in thy wicked heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of release is at hand, and thine eye be evil against thy poor brother, and thou givest him not, and he cry unto the Lord against thee, and it be sin to thee. Okay, so basically what he's saying, in the year of when things return, when things aren't worth as much, they're saying, hey, if you got a bunch of money and someone's in need, don't you be a cheapskate. Don't you not hire them because you know they're only going to be with you for a few months. Don't you not hire them. You hire them. You got the money, because if they cry out to God because you won't, I'll deal with you. That's what the Lord's saying. Verse 10, thou shalt surely give him, and thine heart shall not be grieved when thou givest unto him, because that for this thing the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all thy works and in all that thou puttest thy hand to. For the poor shall never cease out of land. Therefore I command thee, saying, thou shalt open thy hand wide to thy brother, to thy poor, and to the needy in the land. So they're saying, help the poor. And they were to do this without charging interest. Leviticus 25, verse 35. And if thy brother be waxen poor and fall in decay with thee, thou shalt relieve him. Yea, thou shalt be a stranger, or yea, though he be a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with thee, take thou no usury of him or increase, but fear thy God, that thy brother may live with thee. So no increase, no interest. So these loans were not to be with interest. But they were doing that. These provisions were ignored. The sabbatical years had not been kept. The year of Jubilee had been ignored. Slaves were not being released. Debts were not being canceled. The rich were exploiting the poor, and injustice was prevailing. Now, the third group, quickly, Nehemiah lists as having trouble paying their taxes. All right, if we go back to Nehemiah 5 and verse 4, there were also that said, so this is a third group, we have borrowed money for the king's tribute and that upon our lands and our vineyards. So the taxes were due. They didn't have the money, so they took out loans against their land. And just like Judah, all the other Persian provinces, they had to pay taxes, partly in money, partly in produce. And these were not generally felt to be oppressive, but the very nature of the economy, coupled with the overbearing policies of the rich, made even a small amount of taxation to be very grievous. And so these farmers had willingly given all they had to the work on the wall, but some of the rich moneylenders, while they're working on the wall, had foreclosed on their mortgages and sold their families, their children in particular, into slavery. And when people compared themselves with those who were exploiting them, they basically are saying, look, we're human too. We love our children just as much. We're willing to work. We've been here working, but they have made this impossible for us by owning our lands and owning our houses and owning our crops. It is not in our power to repay what we owe and redeem our children from slavery. That's what verse 5 is saying. Verses 2, 3, and 4 give you the three different groups, and verse 5 summarizes the problem. Now I'm going to give you the sneak preview for the next lesson. Nehemiah listens. He didn't know this was happening. And look at verse 6. and I was very angry. Nehemiah is mad because the word of God has been violated and Jewish brethren are exploiting one another. And when we get back to this in Sunday school, in the next lesson I teach, we're going to see a wonderful lesson on how to deal with anger biblically. Yeah.
So my brother come and ask for certain amount of money.
Yeah.
Now, biblically, I give him money.
Well, not necessarily. So if someone come and asks you for money, okay, you got to ask some questions.
Yes.
All right? And so first is am I in a position, see, I don't loan money. Like if someone comes to me and says, hey, I need $1,000. I say, okay. Well, the first question I ask myself is, can I afford to give $1,000? Because I'm not a bank. I'm not a lender. All right? That's not what I do. So either I can give it as a gift or I can't. Because see, I've got a family to take care of. So if I say, you know what, I can't do that without hurting my family. Brother, I'm sorry, I don't have that to give. But I will pray for you, and I might give what I can. I also am going to ask some other people, what are you going to do with it? Who is this person? Have they proven themselves? Do they have a substance issue? All right? You know, have they made one failed investment after another? Okay? So I'm going to ask a bunch of questions of why do you need this money? What are you going to do with it? Because if I give it, I'm now responsible in part for what they do with it. And so I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, and, you know, maybe they're starting up a business and it's an investment. Okay. All right. Do I have it to give? Am I a partner? Am I just helping them out? This is a personal thing. I don't loan money. Never. Because Walter, if I loan you $100, you know what I don't want to do? Hey, Walter. Man, you said you had that money last week. Where's it at? Now, I'm in a no-win situation. All right? So if someone's poor, all right, listen, I'll be honest with you. I'll see a need, and I'll just meet it. Hey, this person over here is having a hard time. Let's take care of them. Let's help them out. That's usually, I'm out in front of the need if I know of it. All right? Now, sometimes there's people, you know, we've had people in the church, Pastor, hey, you know, can you pray for me? And we've helped out. I've given personally to people. And I'll do that again. All right? But if someone comes to me asking to borrow money, again, he's talking to the rich. I'm not rich. All right? And I know what I said earlier in the class. I don't know if there's too many rich people in this church. You know what our class is? Our church is? It's working class. All right? Yeah.
Were the wealthier people working on the wall too, or they were exempt?
They were. They were. But they had no money problems. So this is where the conflict's going. You can see what's happening now. So you got people working on the wall side by side. Some are rich, some are poor. And what's going to happen now, they've had all these, now he's got a new problem of their kids. That guy over there who's working on that portion of the wall just took my kids. You can see how this thing can begin to crumble? All right? So remember what I said. If it can go wrong, what? It will. And right when you fix one problem, you got a new one waiting for you. And he didn't see this coming. So there's a lot to learn here. All right, guys, 10-minute break.